Well, for much of his medical career, Anthony Daniels worked with criminals and the mentally ill. So when the English prison doctor and psychiatrist became a writer, he had plenty of material to work with. Under his pen name, Theodore Dalrymple, he's written more than 30 books and regular columns for The Times, The Observer and The Spectator, among others. His work features frank insights on the problems at the heart of Western culture, in particular the development of a multi-generational underclass. The question of whether society is broken is the subject of a talk he'll give at the Sydney Opera House later this month. Theodore Dalrymple is in Australia as the 2016 Scholar in Residence for the Centre for Independent Studies. He joins us here in the studio. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for asking.
Why did you choose the name Theodore Dalrymple?
Well, I had to choose a name because I was working as a doctor, and I had to choose a name that there was no Theodore Dalrymple. I had to choose a name.
But is it true that you thought that name sounded like a grumpy old man?
Yes. I wanted to sound grumpy and bad-tempered and lamenting the state of the world.
Apart from when you meet, you obviously achieved that in writing. So is Theodore's cri de coeur about a broken society in decline in any way ironic?
It's ironic in the sense that I don't think there was a golden age in which society was whole. But I think that we have to look at the problems that we have. Every age looks at the problems that it has. And what I found in England is the refusal of people to face the problems because they were just too uncomfortable.
So is it your view that just British society is broken, or is it more general than that?
Well, I think, how can I say, we're in the vanguard of most bad developments. But I can see things in other countries going along the same route to an extent. France, for example, where I live some of the time, is perhaps 20 years behind us.
Yeah, you extrapolate a lot from simple facts of life, one being that many children no longer eat meals, not only with their parents, but with any member of their family. Why is that important?
Well, it tells you about how they're socialised or not socialised, actually. It's a very elementary thing to sit at a table with somebody. It's a very elementary social discipline that you wait until other people are there, you share things with them, and so on and so on. They never learn this. So that they actually eat, they sort of forage in their own houses. And it's not surprising, when you see what they forage for, it's not surprising that there's a huge problem of obesity as well. So it actually tells you a great deal.
Now, here's a quote from you. "British culture is the crudest, most aggressive and most lacking in refinement of any of the Western cultures I have observed." Should the rest of us take some comfort from that?
Well, insofar as it's good to see somewhere that's even worse than yourself, I suppose the answer is yes.
But why is Britain so bad?
Well, that's a bit of a puzzle. I can't say that I've got the answer to that. But certainly, if you like, there's been a kind of gestalt switch, so that at one time what was regarded as good is now regarded as bad, and vice versa. So that, for example, self-restraint or emotional constipation, which was once the characteristic of the British, has now become emotional incontinence. And people regard it as a good thing to express themselves, irrespective of whether they've got anything to express or whether what they've got to express is actually repellent.
Well, that actually, in a way, picks up part of my next question, because you have a particularly jaundiced view of youth, possibly just British youth. There's a good deal of pop psychology in Theodore's rants. I'll give you another quote. "Youth is an age not of idealism, but of self-importance, uncertainty, marked by certitude and moral grandiosity. The age of total insouciance." Have you just had terrible luck with the young people you've met?
No, I was just reflecting on my own biography. I think I have a real perception, because when I go to other countries I don't see the same thing, at any rate to anything like the same degree, which reassures me that, in a way, that my perception is of some real problem.
So let's look at this idea of moral grandiosity. Does it include young people who care about global issues like climate change, poverty and inequity, and the growing growing gap between rich and poor?
Well, in England it does. I don't know about other countries, because the people who, for example, will go to a demonstration about the environment will leave a terrible mess behind them, and they don't see the contradiction in doing that. And also one knows that they're not actually going to share their future wealth with other people.
You mean they'll grow up and turn into greedy,
Selfish.
middle-class, selfish people? Is what I say. But what about? I mean, I'm thinking of the contrast between the jaundiced idea of the young and the altruism, the belief in urgent collective action to deal with global problems. Doesn't that go against your idea that narcissism is at the heart of what it is to be?
Well, I think there's a narcissistic concern. I mean, you can be morally exhibitionistic, saying this is what I think, this is what I feel, without actually making any real contribution. If people were making enormous sacrifices, maybe that would be the case, but I don't think they are making sacrifices.
So, I mean, a belief that the world should be a better place, doesn't that sort of preclude narcissism?
Not really. I mean, I don't think anyone believes that the world shouldn't be a better place. We all believe the world should be a better place. But I think there's a kind of exhibitionistic quality to a lot of that concern.
You do seem to have a very dark view. I sort of mentioned this earlier, a dark view about men, young men in Britain in particular. Your psychological theory, boiled down, appears to be that for reasons of hormonal disaffection, young men are predisposed to throw themselves into ideological causes. Could you explain what you mean by that? I mean, are you really saying it's a hormonal thing as a psychiatrist?
I'm saying that it's an age at which you're susceptible to it. It's not inevitable. This is not a kind of fate. It's not something that happens to everybody or anything like that. But if there is some kind of ideological extremist going, it will be the young people who will predominantly fall for it. Just as criminality, for example, it is a young man's game. Well,
you do expand that view when you contemplate the growth of Muslim extremism or amongst young men in Britain, and you, again, sort of taking us back to Britain, you take the view that something in the nature of British society has led to this perverse outcome that British jihadists in working for ISIS in Syria and Iraq are the most brutal as well as the most numerous.
Yes, I think events in France and Belgium may have changed my opinion slightly, because they're pretty terrible too. So it might be that there's something in our modern culture that is very brutal, and you can see it in British social life. It's called social life. It appears to me to be anti-social life. But if you go, for example, to entertainment areas, there's always an element of threat in Britain. You don't feel safe.
Well, in fact, you've said that in no other country does collective enjoyment so quickly turn to fight and riot.
Yeah, well, you see, I had an interesting experience in Manchester. I was staying in Manchester in a hotel, and there was a laughing and screaming outside at 1:30 in the morning. And then when I went out in the morning, I found that actually someone had been nearly murdered there. He was in a coma and he was in hospital. And I thought, well, you can't tell the difference really in England between the sound of young people enjoying themselves and someone being murdered.
Mm. I'm afraid, very sadly, we're out of time. Tony Daniels, or Theodore Dalrymple, if you prefer, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.